All right, we are back. We got
Yep.
disconnected. I'm super sorry about that. Uh, Technology.
Yeah,
Why? I only wish I could use a laptop here. It would be so much easier.
I bet.
I didn't have these problems when I was using a laptop. It's just confounded fire tablet system I have going on here. But
Yeah.
anyway, going back to what we were talking about, what is the problem of? Oh yeah, we were mentioning that you posted in Mixed Middle Arts that a certain group of people should read this book. I think it was Candace Owens, um, Ben Shapiro, and Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah. Well,
I'll
it's
just have to
like,
say too. I think out of those three, I think Dinesh D'Souza is probably worse of the three.
yeah.
I have to say,
Yeah.
okay, Dinesh D'Souza, second place is Candace, and third, well, I'd have to give it to Shapiro, but yeah, Dinesh is like the most intellectually dishonest person on Twitter that I can think of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
why do you think they should read this book?
Well, yeah, like I was saying, like it seems like there's this in people like that, it seems like there's this common trope of talking about being tough on crime and how we need to be tough be like lock people up for doing drugs more, and in economically disadvantaged areas drug use and drug dealing is a huge problem. And it seems like it's really like being tougher on crime, especially in terms of drug crime, is like basically counterproductive because they're you lock people like we were talking about earlier. Apparently 4 out of 5 people in prison are locked up for nonviolent drug offenses, and that just destroys their lives forever. Like they can't vote. Some places they can't get food stamps. They might end up homeless, and if they're in some states, if they're homeless, they might get put back in jail for that, and then they have to get a job, and then they maybe might not be able to get a job, and then you're just an inferior member of society for life. And then there are all these people locked up in prison who they could be productive members of society and contributing to the economy by having jobs and stuff like that. And maybe they could be part of their families who they sometimes have to leave, and you end up breaking up people's families too. So there are all sorts of reasons why I think that if someone makes that sort of argument about being tougher on crime, especially in terms of drug crime, it's really like not supported by the way the world actually works, at least particularly in America in terms of the drug war.
Well, I'm gonna get a little postmodernist here,
Okay.
but the the crime and and how we view it is basically socially constructed.
I agree.
How do you I the act of doing drugs is a crime is like the oddest thing I can think of.
I
Like,
agree.
why that particular thing? Because it can cause harm, or it's just super strange that there are so many dangerous things that humans do, like that are risky, but it's the drugs that people are criminalized.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, I like you were saying earlier, Brent, I sort of agree with the libertarian perspective on this, in that it's not the state's right or even anyone's right to say what you can put into your body or not. And then also, like if you're going to, oh, I just forgot what my second point was, probably because I just did some drugs. Oh no, that's what it was. If there's this Dr. Carl Hart who's been on Joe Rogan's podcast a few times, who's a drug addiction specialist, and he talks about how most recreational drug users are actually responsible users who don't get addicted to it, and they can use drugs moderately without it becoming a problem.
So the people who have a problem, it's typically compounded with some other mental issue, right?
Yeah, like I really think that drug addiction is a mental health problem rather than a drug problem. It's
Yeah, I think
people
I think I'll agree with that too. Yeah.
like
As people who
people
are like in the best of their mental faculties, I don't think typically are the ones that are addicted, right?
Yeah. I really think there is truth to this addictive personality thing. Like I think if people get addicted to virtually any drug, it's because they would have gotten addicted to anything like fucking eating couch stuffings or something like that.
Eating what?
Eating couch stuffings. There's
What's
this there's
that?
this there's this show that my friend told me about called Strange Addictions, where it's just these people who get addicted to like fucking unimaginable shit that doesn't make any sense. And that
Couch
was one of them.
stuffing.
Yeah.
That's disgusting.
Yep.
Yeah, but the drug war is probably, I don't know, just one of the stupidest things ever.
Yeah, it is.
The problem is that there are people I know who are employed by the drug war. So if it went away, those people would have to find a new profession.
Yeah, exactly. Like those million people we were talking about who are employed by the drug war, and well, obviously that's the million people who would lose jobs if the 4 out of 5 people who are in jail for nonviolent drug offenses got released. So obviously, it's
Yeah.
far more than a million people in totality who are employed.
And then you're going to create another million of unemployed people because the felony status won't allow them to get a good job.
Exactly. Yeah.
But here's the thing, and did any of you listen to the Sam Yang podcast with Rogan?
No, I haven't.
I
Have you,
recommend
Brent?
it.
No, I missed that one.
Oh,
I
okay.
do get to watch them.
Yeah, one of the things that he thinks may happen is he thinks that this drug problem is just going to get worse. And that's because people are not going to have economic opportunities that are stripped away by automation. So if we're talking about like a bunch of truck drivers losing their jobs, they're not going to become all of a sudden become coders. A lot of them are going to become drug addicts. It's just statistically, um, he brought up a lot of statistics that show that in areas where um, unskilled and lower skilled labor just drops off is where you see a lot of drug activity. So we're talking about areas where there were a lot of manufacturing jobs that went away overseas. A lot of those people become depressed and do turn to some type of drug addiction. So,
Yeah,
in
that,
saying that, as a if we continue this drug war, there's just going to be way more people in prison.
yeah,
If the economic aspects of our society are weeding out lower skilled and unskilled labor, it's just
yeah.
what are we going to do about that? And I
And
think it's coming around now because a lot of more white people are being affected by it.
that
To be honest, um, because of that aspect, there is some talk. Like if you think about the opioid crisis now in America, they don't speak about it in terms of criminality as much anymore. It's more spoken about as a mental crisis, a
yeah,
crisis um, of mental fortitude and and issues with dealing with mental health. It's no longer, and the reason that is because a lot of the opioid crisis hits everybody. It's not something that, only poor people have to deal with.
Yeah.
Somebody that gets hurt and they're in the middle class and they gotta take chronic, and they have some type of chronic injury or chronic um, issue where they have to take opioids. This does affect them in a different way from when well, the perception is different when we're thinking. I think what Sean McCoy said earlier is like they talk about crack babies and drug dealers, and you have this specific image in your mind of what that is. But then again, with the opioid crisis, it's touching on everybody's lives. And it's not like we haven't seen this crisis play out among celebrities.
Yeah.
Celebrities are dropping like flies because of fentanyl overdoses and things of that nature. So it's not like this is something that's only within the poor and minority communities. It's just kind of a widespread issue at this point.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's probably one of the things that might start to turn people over towards the ineffectiveness of the drug war, just how pervasive it is now in society and how much money has been thrown at this war to no avail.
Yeah, wasn't at one point in the book, didn't she say that Obama increased the spending on stopping drug crime and he spent $1 billion to reduce drug crime by 1% or something like that?
Yeah, that's a horrible payout.
Yeah.
That's like a colossal waste of money. Like, rather just give out $1 billion. Imagine
Yeah.
giving out $1 billion to poor people would probably stop more crime than that measure.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, yeah.
it may or may not, because I know that money does fuel the salaries of people who are in that system. Like, there's definitely winners and losers in the system. The winners of the system are those who are paid to enact the war. The losers are the casualties of the war.
Yeah.
So I don't know if throwing that at the losers would negatively affect the winners in such a way that they would turn to drugs. I highly doubt it, but I do think it probably would have been just more effective at just giving a bunch of poor people money,
Yeah.
or at
Well,
least access to opportunity in some way.
well, that's why I posted on the Facebook group yesterday that I don't understand economics well enough to know how feasible this is, but I wonder if it would be more cost efficient to release those 4 out of 5 people who are nonviolent drug offenders from prison, and if any of them are drug addicts, give them psychological counseling, and if if some of those people don't have any opportunities to get jobs, then maybe giving them training for specific jobs and giving them jobs. And I'm not generally for policies like that because I'm not a socialist, but that's a socialist sort of thing that kind of makes sense to me as long as it's economically feasible. I could be totally wrong about it being economically feasible.
Yeah, well, at least it's a good start. That's why I recommend you checking out the Yang podcast, because his whole it's not so much about the drug war, but he does want to tackle the whole issue with job automation, and his way is to give everybody $1,000 a month.
Oh, so like
Um,
a universal basic income?
yeah, that's his platform that he's running on. He's kind of just running on a sole problem, sole
Okay.
issue as a Democratic candidate. But it's an interesting podcast. It's a dude running for president who wants to enact some form of UBI. But he does talk about how economically depressed communities that suffer from job loss, like massive job loss, do tend to turn to drugs because of that. So it's, that's another major factor as well. Because I know Baltimore used to have like some heavy industrialization before it turned into the place it is now, which is a place where a lot of people live without a whole lot of job opportunity for semi and unskilled labor workers. So
Yeah.
whenever you remove any type of middle class, if you remove any middle class status or opportunity to those workers, it seems that's what tends to happen, and that's basically slowly becoming more of a reality that many of these unskilled and semi-skilled trades are becoming automated out of existence. So that's
Hmm.
something to think about in the future. Like I know if one of my jobs at least could be automated out of existence. So it's something that scares me a little bit. So I'm um, a little fearful of the future in regards of automating things out of existence. And I do think that the people who kind of brush off that, people are just going to find new jobs. It's like there's only so many things that low skill capacity people can do.
Yeah.
There's only so much, and you can't always turn somebody who's an unskilled or low skilled worker into somebody who is a skilled worker. That's just not everybody has that capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And also in terms of what you were saying about people people losing their low class or middle class jobs, being more likely to go start using drugs if that happens. That's another thing that's indicative of the different psychological mindsets in terms of drug use. Like, if I understand correctly, if you look at drugs as an escape from reality because your life is so shitty and that's what you want to use drugs for, then you're more likely to develop an addiction if you have that mindset. But if you have the mindset of using drugs to enhance your life instead, then you're much less likely to be addicted. So if people are losing their jobs and then starting to use drugs when they use their jobs, they're much more likely to develop serious problems with them if they're using them for those reasons, like using them as a
Well,
crutch.
but there are some drugs that don't typically enhance your life that much. Like
Yeah,
I see what you mean by, people who want to smoke weed or do some psychological or I'm sorry, psychedelic drugs to kind of expand and find some emotional center. But when it comes to stuff that like the real bad stuff, like we're talking about opioids, meth, crack, they totally fuck up your brain chemistry in a way that you're like, what is a high? A high is, in some respects, propelling you to levels of serotonin that you can't achieve naturally, right?
yeah. Hmm.
So if you become addicted to that feeling, it becomes very destructive because you're not going to be able to naturally, like, even a regular normal level serotonin is going to be like depressive for someone who's used to enhancing their serotonin receptors through illegal drugs like heroin and meth and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. That was sort of some of what I was saying. Although, like, it
Because
does
like
seem.
I know what you mean too, because weed doesn't do that. Neither does LSD or mushrooms. They do not. They expand the mind, but they do not fuck your brain chemistry so much that regular emotions become depressive.
Well, I think even with the, I mean, there is something to be said for your point for sure that there are different drugs that affect your brain differently. But another thing I'm reminded of, I mean, it's been a while since I've watched that podcast, but people like Dr. Carl Hart rather, and also I think Dr. Gabor Mate talk about, but particularly Dr. Carl Hart talk about how even the supposedly more dangerous drugs like cocaine and crystal meth and heroin, even with those ones, most people tend to use those fairly responsibly without getting addicted to them or developing problems with them.
Yeah, well, that's why I can never. Well, I could never take any of those because
I don't have
I.
any desire to try those personally, but I
Well,
think if
I
someone
just
wants
have
to,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I have that in me.
Sorry?
I have the addiction quality in me, so that's why I wouldn't want to even try them. Because like I was addicted to nicotine for a long time, um, and I definitely know what addiction does. So I just steer away from stuff that's hyper addictive. The only I do take, like I've taken OxyContin on occasion for severe pain, and I'm talking about toothaches and shit like that. But I've never felt that I needed to take any of those illicit substances
Yeah,
because
me
I always
neither.
had the fear in my mind that it's something that could ruin my life.
Yeah. Yeah, well, me too. Like I've never had any desire to try anything like that because I have that same sort of fear too.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the Gabber? Was that a Gabber Mate? Was that a recent podcast? Because I know there's like a drug debate podcast that Rogan did.
Oh, I wasn't talking about Gabor Mate being on Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't think he has been on Joe Rogan's podcast. Um,
Oh,
I was thinking specifically of him being one of the many people, I think, including Dr. Carl Hart, who were in this documentary called The Culture High, which was, I think it was mainly about weed, but it was also about drugs in general and the drug war and how there are a hell of a lot of misconceptions about how dangerous drugs are and
well,
that
that's
sort
kind
of
of
thing.
like it's kind of very similar to the Hamilton Morris one.
In a
Hamilton.
way, with him, he's more talking about like all these sort of different. Well, actually, I guess it depends on which episode with Hamilton Morris you're talking about because I don't
The
remember
most
which one
recent
is which.
one.
Oh, okay. Is it in the most recent one where they're talking more about those sorts of issues? Because I remember one of them they're going more into like all the crazy, strange types of drugs that he's tried. Was that the first one?
That's probably the first one. The second one, they do talk about like addiction quality, how the drug scheduling system in the United States, and how they get a lot of things wrong.
Oh, right.
So
Like
it's
weed is
more,
Schedule One.
yeah, so stuff like that, basically, they do get into a lot. He does get into a lot of misconceptions about drug use, um, and other things of that nature. But we do talk about how the most dangerous thing about drugs is not knowing what's in them. So does often take the approach of making sure his drugs are sourced well, I guess.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So, and he says it's usually not the drugs itself that are dangerous. It's the composition of the drugs when they're not put together properly, like when they're cut with things.
Yeah, yeah. Like how
And he
people,
believes,
like how
yeah,
people would go and get some heroin and then die because they don't know that fentanyl is in it.
or too much fentanyl. It's the amount of fentanyl that's in something is just one small mistake is deadly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's crazy, but man, it's I don't know. It's a ongoing problem that we're having here. But how is it? I'm curious. What is drug rhetoric like in Canada?
Well, I don't really know that much about how it is in general, other than obviously Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, and a bunch of other people talking about the positive benefits of legalizing weed, which obviously was done federally here last year. So,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't really, I'm not really that aware, honestly, of what the general rhetoric seems to be, but it seems like, especially at least a lot more than it used to be, people are more likely to acknowledge that, um, more probably more likely, specifically, weed is not a thing that needs to be legalized. And I
Criminalized.
think that, the things that people talk about, in terms of weed, apply to most drugs in general. Like, if it's legal, then it's more difficult for kids to get it. And like we were just talking about, there's quality control, and you know what you're getting, and there are standards that have to be met, and these kinds of things. And how, well, and obviously the government can make in a lot more tax revenue that way too. So there are all
Mhm.
sorts of benefits, but those are the only sorts of ones that I've heard.
Oh, okay. So you don't have the problem where cops are just searching people for drugs all the time in Canada?
Not that I know of. I mean, I've only been stopped by cops by stops. Stopped by cops a couple of times, and they've never asked me if they can search my vehicle. And out of all the other people I know who've been stopped by cops, I don't think that they have asked them if they could search their vehicle either. But they usually ask if you've had any drugs or alcohol or something like that.
Of course, everyone's gonna say no, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely I've had experiences with the police being searched and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
it was I was pretty much in Dustin's shoes as far as that goes. I just like you're wasting your time. You know, I you're not going to find anything, and but I remember well, and another time. They told me that I looked like a wanted criminal. I guess they had somebody. They made me wait while another officer came with a Polaroid camera so that they could snap a picture of my face. And, so I waited for like 20 minutes and then they just let me go. And that was
Okay.
Yeah, one of their justifications was, "Oh, you sound high." Like, okay.
You
And then
always sound
another,
high, Dusty.
yeah, I know. So that's been a big problem. Like at work, people are always asking, "Are you high, man?" It's like, no, I just sound like this. Sorry to disappoint you.
How slowly do you talk when you get baked? Holy crap.
I don't know. I've never recorded myself, so I couldn't tell. It'd probably sound the same. I just say stupider things and laugh at dumb stuff. Um, but yeah, as far as like why people get searched for drugs so much here is there's financial incentives to do so for the police.
Oh
Like
yeah, they go into that in the book as well, right?
yeah, that's it's a huge problem with the incentive systems that we have in the United States here when it comes to policing. It's like there's such an overloaded burden on finding drugs above everything else that it's just people just don't like dealing with police in general here. Um, Especially when when you when you might be calling the police for protection and then they come around and try to search you.
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's pretty fucking bad.
Yeah. Wow.
And the thing is everyone's afraid of the police trying to get up in their business because they want to look for drugs. It's like, man, it's like, come on, let's try to get some Fourth Amendment protections back. This is just ridiculous with all it's like a drug Nazi state,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
It's like
And
instead of looking for Jews, they're looking for drugs.
yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah, it is. Like the drugs are
we should
the
just
downfall of society. They cause all society's problems. We have to stop the drugs. They're everywhere.
yeah, I think some effective rhetoric for big L libertarians is just to call cops drug Nazis. That's basically what they are. They're trying to look for
Well,
drugs everywhere.
there's some anarchists who talk about them that way, like Michael Malice.
Yeah, yeah. He definitely does. There's people who are very sympathetic to the plight of people getting locked up in cages and herded around like animals.
Yeah.
But I think it's a net negative for society. I don't see that I'm seeing positive effects from this drug war.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's totally counterproductive. What do you think,
Um,
Brent?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely the result of um, allowing there to be markets for political influence is sort of the indirect thing that I see. Um, because that's the case, you can have a prison lobby, you can have a policing lobby, um, you can have policy be directed by the financial incentives of, just asset seizure, the bail system, courts and lawyer fees, things like that. It's just, that's why it is that you can't just let markets do anything. You know, it's there has to be limits. Like markets are probably okay for a lot of things, but that's just one of those things that it's not okay for because that's the effect that it ultimately will produce.
Yeah,
yeah, it's
for sure.
enforcing bad incentives. I think it's incentives, like especially when you're dealing with markets, it's very good to scrutinize bad incentives. Like, especially, I read another book on the 2008 market crash. I know I'm just always obsessed with that. But the whole market crash was basically fueled off of horrible incentives that helped nobody. People
Yeah, it
getting
makes
rich off of
sense.
those incentives. So the thing about these horrible incentives is they have huge impacts on people when they're not regulated or at least scrutinized in any meaningful way. And this is something that just needs to be done in this respect. It's very difficult to speak of too because it's such a large, complex, and it's a large and complex issue that needs to be spoken about with a lot of nuance. It's not something that can be simply conveyed to people, and it's just like that analogy or that image that Sean McCoy talked about, like this this car was paid for by drug dealers. You know, that's a
Yeah.
very simple narrative, and it's a little bit further from the truth than that. You know, it's not simply paid by drug dealers; it's paid by drug users, the families that the pain that has caused these families for having a family member in prison, the economic impact of that family member being in prison upon the rest of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
prison is huge, has huge economic impact on people. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But we got
And
to make sure that we put the right people in prison.
and the political consequences of that are one of the things that they talk about in the book too, right? How like how you can't vote if you're a felon, and I remember when I went through this part in the book, remembering you telling me about this before, about how prisons are built in rural areas, and then there's an artificial population increase in those rural areas because the prisoners are included as part of the population, but they can't vote. So then the people in the other party, they have like it's easier for them to win, right?
Yeah, well, it definitely boosts rural population numbers since prisons are typically um, situated in rural areas. Also, to go back to the prison industrial complex, these rural areas are boosted economically by having a prison there
Yeah.
because it's generating revenue for the rural surroundings, the community. It's providing jobs, so of course they're going to love having a prison out there where they can work. So it's definitely a little bit of it's another thing that puts the divide on urban versus rural.
Yeah.
Having
You,
these prisons fuel rural economies is one part of the equation there.
do you guys think that the cultural perception of prison and prisoners would be different if prisons were in big cities instead?
well, they used to be. I mean, that's something that's kind of shifted, I think, over the decades. Like,
Oh, okay.
and especially like when you're talking, not necessarily large prisons, but if you're talking about jails and things like that, that has shifted towards rural areas in recent years. So, um, but as far as how people perceive that, like, I don't know. I mean, I think honestly, the reason why the prisons are there is because the narrative exists first, or the cultural viewpoints exist first, and then the prisons come. But
Okay.
I mean, if you're thinking about it, well, you have to drum up the perception of crime first before you have policy implemented, that's perceived as favorable or whatever. And if the policy is, let's build more prisons out in the country, okay, like keep it away from commerce and stuff, and you don't want it to be a blight on the heavily, the areas where most of the money is invested in other industries. They don't want the blight of a large prison being there. So, put them out in the country, and nobody is, nobody really has to look at it or whatever.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
The only time I had to look at prisoners is when they were doing like road projects.
Right.
That
Yeah,
was
that's
like the only time.
It's. I remember the first time I saw that down. I live in Alabama, and the first time I saw that struck me, because I didn't see that as much in Virginia, in the Northern Virginia area.
Yeah, when I went to college in California, they used prisoners as groundskeepers.
Oh, okay.
So,
Wow.
I think the jail was located like maybe, I think I'd say it wasn't that far. It's like 5 miles east of the college. But
Okay.
they'd have inmates come and pick up trash and clean stuff up. So we'd see them all the time. I'm pretty sure they were glad to be there because it's a college and a lot of young women walking around.
That's what I was thinking.
But I'm pretty sure they weren't allowed to say anything.
Right.
Else they'd probably get in big trouble.
Right.
So, but I don't know. It's just locking somebody up in a cage because of drugs seems stupid.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just like completely ridiculous. Like, I understand people who are physical dangers to society, but people who are dangerous to themselves, like, typically we don't put them in prison. We put them in some type of therapy or something.
Yeah.
It's
Like
even
if someone tries to kill themselves, they don't generally put you in prison even if like if you attempted to kill yourself. So obviously you're an extreme risk to yourself in that situation, but it's not like they put you in prison if you try to kill yourself. I mean, obviously they put you in prison if you're a murderer and you kill someone else, but it's interesting that there's that at least there seems to be that more of an understanding of mental health in terms of that particular crime.
Yeah, the thing I would be okay with, like someone who's dealing drugs that gets put away, would be someone who cuts drugs with obviously dangerous things that cause people to overdose. Like, I would have no compunction over a dealer that was selling something cut with amount of fentanyl that's going to cause people to die.
Yeah, that sounds understandable.
But if they're dealing like a couple pills that they got from their last doctor visit, I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
Those pills are likely safe. And,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical grade. Probably not going to kill anybody unless they take a massive amount that they're not really supposed to.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's all drug stuff. It seems that I don't know, the U.S. is just entirely too conservative about certain things. And it seems like sometimes I feel like the U.S. is behind the times. I know we made inroads before you guys did about marijuana, but yours is federal though, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah,
so you guys actually kind of beat us because it's not federal.
Yep. What do you think about what do you think Trump is going to do anything about that?
Well, it's not really up to Trump, so it's not something that Trump can do.
Okay.
It's all about Congress and whether they can agree on that.
Okay.
So yeah, who does the scheduling anyway? I don't even know. I think is that an executive branch of the scheduling?
I don't know.
I honestly thought that it was the Department of Justice that does that, but I guess I could be completely wrong about that. I know that they're, as far as enforcing goes, um, certainly, uh, Attorney General, can say, well, we're not going to really enforce the laws or whatever. We're going to just, this is not really something we need to enforce. But as far as who's making the schedule, I don't know.
I also want to ask you guys if you ever seen The Wire.
No, I haven't.
No, I haven't.
Okay, because I was going to ask you if you think. Okay, so in this show, I think it's 5 seasons. One season, I think 3 or 4 seasons in, they start allowing an open drug market, and then the police just oversee the open drug market. They don't intervene.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's an interesting concept, yes. And they call it Hamsterdam in the show. It's based in Baltimore.
Okay. Yeah.
I was always wondering if that would ever be a feasible idea to have open drug markets where the police enforce nonviolent encounters. I wonder if that could ever be some type of solution.
It does sound like a good idea in theory. I don't know.
It's not, the optics aren't very good though.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was an interesting concept that they played around with in that show, which was about Baltimore inner city drug trade.
Right. Yeah,
I highly recommend it. It's great.
I've heard that it's really good from lots of people. I've just never seen it.
It's like, I think I watched it after there was something that made me want to watch it, and that was the whole Freddie Gray stuff. And I remember, do you know that activist, Michael A. Woods?
Yeah, the former cop, right?
Yeah, he started talking about The Wire and that he basically lived it. So I was like, okay, I got to check out this Wire show to see what's going on. And I was like, oh man, this is some crazy stuff. Like, I would recommend it to anybody. He says that the show is pretty accurate to how things are run in Baltimore when regarding drug crime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I would say check that out if you want to see that's the worst of that, or just the first 48 as well. If you want to see.
Oh, I've never seen that either.
Violent Encounter. Well, the first 48 is all about murder.
Okay.
And 99% of the murders are due to drug deals gone bad. So if you want to see that, that's another thing to check out.
Okay.
It's basically you know the show Cops, right? Imagine Cops, except they don't follow cops, they follow detectives. So it's not people going out on patrol and like a camera crew following them. It's a camera crew following investigators. So they're investigating a murder. They're not going out on dispatch calls or anything like that.
Okay.
So it's like watching a detective show that's actually a real detective show. They're following real detectives around, and you get to see how these cases work and how they figure things out. And it's all homicide, so there's always a murder involved in the in the cases that they follow.
Oh, okay.
So there's another hardcore American show for you.
I haven't seen that one. There's one that's similar though. Have you watched Mindhunters on Netflix?
I've
wanted to start it. I've wanted to start it. It's just there's so many goddamn Netflix
I
shows that I
know,
need to
I know,
watch.
right?
Well,
I've
feel
seen,
like
I've,
that's
that's funny.
more in the market lately. Like,
I've seen,
Well,
I've
should,
seen that, I've seen that one. I thought it was awesome. I love that show.
so,
yeah, the problem with Netflix is there's way too much good original content on there that it's hard to keep up,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
and that's one of them. But
Yeah,
yeah, I haven't checked that out yet. So, was there any other final words that you wanted to speak about the book?
Mm,
I don't know. We did touch earlier on the Cato Institute. Like, it's a libertarian think tank that they still keep track of police misconduct and stuff like that. I was really glued to that for years, and I thought that was just a really good resource that kind of I felt like it could change the perspective of somebody who might think that there's nothing to be concerned about as far as law enforcement goes, because I just don't think it rings true. I think there's plenty to be concerned about. I mean, law enforcement are they're human beings just like anybody else, but I think there's a lot of I guess we were talking about incentives, well, maybe not a financial incentive per se, but there is a sort of authority incentive for people who are naturally, predisposed to seek positions of authority or power or dominance over other people. That's like a magnet. It's, well, here's a job that I can get, without really having to jump through a lot of hoops. And people will just yield to, even giving me the benefit of the doubt in most situations and stuff like that. Maybe that's shifting culturally a little bit now, that it's, say, in the last 10 years or so, but it's still, it's still a thing that people can seek out. And so, I don't know, the Cato Institute, I got to say, they did a pretty good job. They still do a great job of documenting a lot of the misconduct that goes on the policing.
All right. And how about you, Andrew? Do you have any final thoughts about the new Jim Crow? Uncle Andros, are you still there? Uh-oh.
We might have lost the connection there.
Did he drop off?
Oh, there he is.
I got kicked out.
Oh, all right. Well, what were your last thoughts about the new Jim Crow
And the drug war.
and the drug war? Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And the drug war. I would have to say my final thoughts are yes, this book does have a little bit of a left wing bend to it,
Yeah.
but there's some great facts and research regarding disparities. And if you don't you don't even have to think about the disparities, but just the impact of what a drug felony has on someone's life.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it also does a good job of going into what you had explained to me a little bit before I read the book about how it's more of a cultural misconception, perhaps, that black people are more likely to commit crimes than white people, and it's like a sort of a subconscious thing, but like not like unintentional thing with cops to seek out black people rather than white people because they think that that's the case.
yeah, and the thing about crime itself, to uncover crime is predicated on the resources that you attribute to crime. So if nobody's putting resources to root out crime in a suburb, it doesn't mean that there's not any crime in the suburb going on. It's just that there's no resources to actually uncover that crime.
Yeah.
Oh crap! Did I drop? Oh yeah, I might have to run up to the top there.
I
It's
can
gonna
still
drop out
I
again.
can still hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna reset the fire tablet. But yeah, there's there is biased enforcement. There's no doubt about it. This book kind of gives you all the facts and lays down all the facts, showing that there's definitely biased enforcement of drug laws and biased sentencing of drug offenders in court. So it's not. Yes, the there is a racial element to everything, but there's more than just that. It's nice knowing what the facts and figures are behind
Yeah,
these disparities, at least.
yeah. Well, that's why to me it's like you were just saying. That's like the racial disparities are an extremely important aspect. But to me, the main point is ending the drug war because it's counterproductive.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yet, and the drug war, it's not solving any problems.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I do think just I know I said it in the beginning, but it's um, I do think racism can explain part of the disparity, but I also think it has a lot to do. I suspect that it has a lot to do with population density and just the fact that you're going to have more policing going on in heavily populated areas versus rural areas. You know,
that's
and
a good
that
point.
speaks to what Dustin was saying just a minute ago too. But so
All right, so I guess we'll start
Yeah.
wrapping things up because I think this is gonna kick us out right now because
yeah,
I can't get the fire restarted here. I don't know what this keeps happening today. It
Oh,
keeps kicking me out and not letting me rejoin. Bastard.
oh, usually it lets you rejoin.
It usually does, yes. I don't know what's going on today. It's not letting me get back in for some
Probably the government,
strange
man.
reason. It's the government, man.
Yeah.
That's the good. Let me see. I might be able to get back in here. Try a different tactic. Maybe this will work. So it won't let me go view regular tab. Okay. Let me paste this here. Hopefully I could do it in time. Let me do it in time. Probably not. No, it's not letting me in. Well, anyway, this is probably going to end streaming. That's fine. Um,
well, it
what
was a
was?
good conversation. I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's always welcome. I don't bar individuals typically unless they. There's certain people that I have to make sure they don't talk about certain topics, but I typically don't bar people from the conversations. I
Yeah.
just have to limit certain people from veering off into certain topics. That's about it. But yeah, you're always welcome. Next week, I haven't announced it, but I know you're finished finally, Andrew. I think we're good to talk about some Wheel of Time stuff.
Cool.
I think we'll talk about the first book actually.
Sure. I
We'll
should
do that
listen to
next week.
some of those podcasts you recommended to me that go into the books.
Yeah, there's the Wheel of Time spoilers. Great podcast. Probably the best Wheel of Time podcast. Also, you could check out the Legendarium. Um, they do two-part synopsis on each book. So they spend about 2 hours on each book. The other podcast spends like 30 minutes to an hour on each chapter of